morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Billy Bob here. I've got a full round table. We've got Ben in Hungary, Leo in Berlin, and Carlo in Washington, D.C. Thank you guys all for joining us.
Billy Bob in California, East Coast and
I'm
West Coast.
in California. I couldn't do this. We couldn't do this without each other. So I just want to appreciate you guys for joining me. Leo's here a lot. Carlo, Ben, you guys are here every day. I appreciate that. So we titled our show "Western War and Eastern Peace." And to me, that's just these are the choices for humanity. You know, we've got the West trying to resist their inevitable decline of global power, and we have the East wanting to advance humanity into this peace through mutual prosperity paradigm, where the West is just not going to have the power it currently does. It's not going to have the say so to dominate the economy, exploit the developing countries, and so they're resisting that. They want to maintain their hegemony, and they might drag us into a war. That's really a distinct possibility. We could be dragged into a war. And meanwhile, China wants to just, maintain, develop peace through mutual prosperity is what they're trying to achieve. So that was the broad topic. Obviously, specifically, there's a lot of things going on right now in Palestine. Is a big deal. We've got Putin in Beijing. We've got an agreement between Biden and Maduro on oil, which is probably going to help Biden's political aspirations a little bit if he can ease the gas prices and ease the quality of life for U.S. citizens. But there's so many things to discuss. There's any number of places we can begin. So,
I think
yeah,
we're definitely going to harken back to Israel-Palestine because it's been, what's the eighth or ninth day of the Al-Aqsa storm, the Hamas operation, and the absolute bombardment there. And that also ties in with Germany because some amazing German leaders have shown up in Tel Aviv. But for me, today is the first official day of the Third Belt and Road Forum, right? 140 plus nations have representatives there. Not all of them at the highest level, but body of UN organizations. It's just like this massive family, and that's what I've been watching. So I first wanted to start out with let's look at just the BRICS countries, sans India. We'll talk about India, but here was the official initial response: Russia, immediate ceasefire. Let's send aid to people who are in trouble. China, immediate ceasefire. Let's send aid to people in trouble. Brazil, immediate ceasefire. Let's send aid to people in trouble. Then there's South Africa, immediate ceasefire. We condemn this apartheid regime. Fuck you, these are war crimes. They were the real outspoken ones. And let's send aid to people in need. And then there was India, who are somehow with Israel, absolutely 100%. I found some amazing things on Indian social networks we can bring up later for a laugh. But that was that. Whereas the West, as we can see, Blinken buzzing around, but people keeping him up the whole night before actually attending a meeting. MBS did that, and they're doing diplomacy with two aircraft carrier battleships, aircraft carrier groups. There's a third, some sort of operation, another 2,000 soldiers heading their way, and it's all the way with Israel. Nobody is condemned. And the latest one was people were working. Lavrov was working all night. Putin was working all day yesterday before he went. He finally arrived in Beijing for this thing. And he finally got UN Security Council resolution, a draft. Russia submitted it for immediate ceasefire aid to the people in need. And it was shot down by Britain, France, Japan, and the US. That was earlier this morning.
So a UN Security Council ceasefire shot down by the West.
Yes, yeah. Apparently, there's another one roughly along the same lines going to be proposed by Brazil later on. But they just shot it down because officially that it was, we didn't condemn Hamas. You think the 2 billion Muslims around the world care about these sort of Western shenanigans of condemning shit? Children are dying. More children have died than the entire 1 year and almost 2 years of the Ukraine war. More children have died in Gaza in these 9 or 8 days. You think they care about that? They want to stop the bloodshed. Shut down. And people around the world see it for what it is.
Exactly. And good morning, Todd. Uh, to
Hi, Todd.
Washington ought to wake up because Colombia, the president of Colombia, came out with a strong statement
Gustavo Petro is the big. Go on,
on Gaza. Yeah, and how many decades have the U.S. Positioned tyrants been running that country and killing their own people in enormous numbers, the peasant class and the indigenous people. So I don't know what's going to wake up Washington, but the polarity part is extremely severe. I mean, it's an obvious between the Chinese, say, Belt and Road Initiative, and the way the U.S. goes about its diplomacy, which is to basically, if you build it, we'll bomb it. And
Yeah,
the world
that's
is caught on.
literal.
that should be the Department of State or Department of Defense
If
slogan.
you build it, we'll bomb it.
Yeah.
No, that's a great slogan, and definitely they're doing gunboat diplomacy off of Palestine right now with their 2 carrier groups. Yeah, they're awful.
Yeah.
Leo, what about you? What's on your mind?
What's the view?
We just add one thing quickly. Blinken visited Saudi Arabia, and his meeting was supposed to be taking place at night, and bin Salman didn't show up until the morning.
Yeah, he was absolutely. And he was held up by Al-Sisi in Egypt as well, but not as long as MBS. MBS clearly doesn't give a fuck about Blinken or the US.
Yeah, no, those are deliberate slights, just to kind of communicate their unhappiness.
Yeah. There are definitely no accidents of that magnitude, like 8 hours. That's not an accident in international diplomacy. But I actually have some questions about Hamas specifically, because I've been reading there's so many different perspectives on Twitter, and the perspective that Israel funding Hamas as a block to the more leftist and moderate factions in Palestinian resistance movement in order to ultimately impede the road towards a 2-state solution. What do you guys think about that? Is there much? How big of a grain of salt should we take with that?
Not a lot. I have clipped this because someone brought it up. That's why the publication that you can put it on screen if you like, Billy Bob. This is from Haaretz. It is originally from 2008. The publication date is 2023 because someone brought it back up. But that is as explicit as it gets. Basically, it was against the more, the moderate sort of secular nationalist PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization headed by Yasser Arafat at the time. He was also killed, but it was basically anybody. This is telling the Knesset. Knesset is the parliament, right? And his party, I think, is the Likud, and he's telling everyone to just finance absolutely explicitly on Israeli media. I mean, it was very, very much
right.
In
so
sync.
So from this we can two questions. Is it also possible? Is it too paranoid or giving Netanyahu, I like to call him, too much credit to say that this could be a psyop as well, or it could be to delegitimize Hamas and to delegitimize the more militant? I don't know. That's probably too paranoid.
Last show with John, we touched on this diversity of opinion regarding Hamas
I missed
the
that
Western
one.
left.
Sorry.
No problem. So, but we can touch on it because it's important to clarify the 2 positions. So one position is that Hamas is very similar to ISIS and Al Qaeda, and Hamas actually sided with ISIS and Al Qaeda during the attack against Syria, the Syrian civil war. And so now we're thinking that Hamas is still working with the West. So this is one perspective, that Hamas is still working with the West, and they invaded Israel with the knowledge of the Israeli intelligence, or at least the higher ups, and they got them to commit all kinds of atrocities and take human shields and do all the things that terrorists do in order to, to justify and allow Israel to do the response that they wanted to do and just needed a justification for. But I think there's several problems with that narrative, but it's definitely a narrative that is many people are beholden to. So we talked about what was that guy's name at the New Atlas? Brian Berletic kind of suggested that. He said, we need to really be wary of Hamas.
Yes.
However, in the last 2 years, Hamas has made an about face. They've done détente with Iran, with Syria, and they've kind of apologized, so to speak, of being on the wrong side of the Syrian war over the last 2 years. And also, there's a lot of leftists. A lot of leftists did the same thing. I mean, they weren't on the wrong side for as long as Hamas was, but at first they were on. They were supporting the color revolution in Syria, and I believe Max Blumenthal and some others started out on anti-Assad, and then once they realized what was going on, they changed their tune. So I'm not sure.
No, good on them. They learned. Yeah, I mean, one further thing to add to that we all know that Netanyahu was in deep political trouble back at home before this horrific thing happened. And it's horrific. Innocents did die. This is terrorism. Nobody here loves Hamas. Okay, just to make that clear to YouTube and to the viewers. But it got him out of a really deep rut. Go ahead, Carlo.
No, it's important to remember too that Netanyahu has worked with Hamas in the past, and and he worked with Hamas to destabilize any movement, say like the PLO, Yasser Arafat's PLO, to come to a two-state solution. So Netanyahu is partially responsible for the strength of Hamas and for the death and destruction that's going on now. I mean, largely responsible. It was Netanyahu's rhetoric and powerful rhetoric that was behind the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin. So Netanyahu bears a great responsibility for the deaths on both sides right now, on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side. And of
course,
anyway, and yet he's in power and feted by the West still. I mean, so it's just an abomination.
So it seems that if the initial attack by Hamas was allowed to happen or engineered by Israel in order to save Netanyahu's political career or to justify a military incursion into Gaza from the IDF, it has probably backfired, no? Because I just saw a poll from Jerusalem Times that 86% of Israelis blamed the Netanyahu administration for what happened, for what is happening right now.
Yeah, and that's newer. Even on the day of the attack, the main op-ed on Haaretz was Netanyahu is fully responsible for everything that happened here because of his intolerance towards Palestinians in Israel.
And that's why I don't think it was planned. I mean, that's why I kind of reject that idea that it was that Israel facilitated it or at least knew about it and just let it happen. I reject that. I think it was a tactical victory for Hamas, and it's just they're waging asymmetric war and they were extremely successful. Now there's the question of atrocities, right? So we ought to condemn atrocities, we ought to condemn the killing of innocent people, but at the same time, who is really responsible for that? I mean, can you just blame Hamas for committing atrocities? I mean, they have atrocities committed against them every day for the last 75 years. And so it's just natural.
Not just Hamas, the Palestinian people who are not equal to Hamas.
Yeah. So it doesn't make any sense to confuse the context and to pretend that in a vacuum, for no reason at all, Hamas just all of a sudden started doing atrocities. No, it's the expected reprisal of a people who have been in a concentration camp for 75 years. If they get a chance, they're going to lash out and attack in the same way that they're always under attack. So it's not to support it and it's not to condone it, but it's to understand that's the reality.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about what happened ever since the dawn of I think it's now universally agreed that it's the Al-Aqsa flood, but before that, Leo, go ahead.
Just a quote by Nelson Mandela that it is the occupying apartheid states that shapes the form that the conflict takes place.
Absolutely.
They decide because when all roads to any kind of negotiation are blocked, the
Yeah.
only path left is violence, and that's all I wanted to add.
I
Yeah,
think
and I just want
we brought up Norman Finkelstein exactly in the same context.
yeah, great guy.
Yeah.
I just wanted to add, where did people think these young Hamas fighters came from? They came from the wombs of women in Gaza. I mean, they there's a process that ended up that put them in the position that they were in. The one of the masterminds, supposedly this DF or DF, however you pronounce it, he lost an arm and a leg, and family members. To I mean, this is a long history of a whole process. They didn't just come out whole cloth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, anyway, I just want. It's
Of
too
course, the
obvious,
Western media wants to pretend
right?
that it's all happening all of a sudden in a vacuum. There's no context at all. It's just crazy terrorists being terrorists.
But
Ben, you were saying something.
let's see how things have changed, because ever since this began, here's what I fucking condemn. The Israeli government said you have to evacuate the northern part of the Gaza Strip and go south. That's about 1.1 million people, half of people there, 60% 18 and under children. And then you have to do it in 24 hours. The UN condemned that. The rest of them, you have to escape through the Rafah crossing, the one that goes to the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. Then they bombed it, okay? And then they bombed the evacuating, what do you call them, refugees, and then they bombed the. These are all evidence. Like video is all over the place. The emergency crews who showed up to try to save them. They're bombing hospitals. They're bombing UN schools. It's just carpet bombing that has gone on nonstop. Yesterday at 9 a.m. Sorry, not yesterday, Monday. Well, yeah, yesterday was Monday, 9 a.m. Israeli time. There was supposed to be some kind of ceasefire to let Americans out. That was exclusive. The two American UN workers out and the aid in, and it didn't happen. And then they went to the BBC, the Zionist regime went there and said, no, we didn't actually have one of that in charge. The latest I've seen was the director, an Egyptian director, but he is in a refugee camp. His home is in a refugee camp in Gaza. His house was bombed with wife, children. He's gone. That's it. The director of the Rafah crossing, the one little exit they have out there is the sea, where you can go to 16 kilometers, I think, before you get shot to hell by the Israeli Navy. And all around, there's that big cement blocks of guard towers, barbed wire. It is Scott Ritter has evolved to saying it's not an open air prison camp; it's an open air concentration camp. Basically, it is. And then they shut down the water, shut down the fuel, called them human animals. There's a whole lot to be very angry about. And I know that the Arab world and even the greater Muslim world is very, very furious.
And it's been in evidence for 75 years.
Yeah.
I mean, Theodore Adorno at the Frankfurt School had to follow up on Billy Bob's statement, had a term for what's going on in the media here, ahistorical rationalism. But when there was the Great Return or whatever I can't remember the exact title, but a few years ago, unarmed Palestinians went to the fence that was there between them and between Gaza and the rest of Israel.
2004, you mean?
And they mowed them down. They shot the emergency people that came in to haul them out, and they shot journalists. The Israelis shot journalists. One guy caught on camera was in a wheelchair, and they shot him in a wheelchair. So
they had T-shirts saying 2 for 1, aim for the belly, and there was a pregnant woman's thing. Yes. They do this proudly. It's called mowing the grass, mowing the lawn, the Dahia doctrine, which you can Google right now. It's been in effect for 20 years.
So what do you guys think? Scott Ritter's been talking about how ineffectual this Israeli force is going to be, and to frankly, what I saw when they were mowing down unarmed civilians, that was really cowardly. That to me suggests these are not people that are well trained or capable of taking on a real force of disciplined armed people. So
It's certainly
I tend
plausible.
to agree with Scott. But anybody, what do you think
It,
about
it,
that?
it's
Feels
certainly
like a trap,
plausible
Leo.
that our Western ideas of the Israeli military is way overblown. We've over years come to believe that there's some invincible, mighty force, with the Iron Dome being completely impenetrable, and Israeli soldiers being these super soldiers with like state of the art equipment. But yeah, like we have seen recently, that's kind of a sham.
2 years
And
ago, that was
and
true of NATO,
also,
wasn't it?
sorry,
2 years ago, that was true of NATO.
We
right,
thought the same
right,
thing about NATO
absolutely.
and found out. And yeah, I think they're being exposed. I think that's why there's a delay, right? They keep delaying the invasion of Gaza for two reasons. I think they were legitimately caught off guard by this Hamas attack. They were not prepared to do what was necessary. And like Scott said when he was here, like it takes a lot of training and planning to do something like that, and they don't have the force for it, and they haven't implemented any plans, to accomplish that. So that's why they keep delaying. And also, I mean, I hear different things, and it's hard to find out. It's hard to know for sure what is true and what is false. But Hezbollah and Iran, I've heard both said if there is a land invasion of Gaza, that they're going to have to intervene.
Yeah.
To what scale, I don't know. But I mean, you hear that. So you wonder, is Israel? I think there's a lot of discussion going on behind the scenes, because I really don't think Israel wants to escalate. They want to save face, but they don't want to escalate. And they're in a tough spot because Iran and Hezbollah, kind of have a veto over that. And they can save face to a certain extent, but they're not going to be able to go into Gaza and not have a bloodbath, a bloodbath for themselves, really, because that's what would happen.
And on the other side,
There was a huge backtracking, but I'll say it after Leo. Go.
just quickly, on the other side, it's very plausible, it's believable that our idea of the strength of Hamas and Hezbollah is
Inflated?
Deflated.
Is extremely we've underestimated here in the West. Of course, they picture them, we have, or at least I have over the years have this idea that they're just a bunch of ragtag extremists. But Hezbollah has just announced that they have 100,000 very well-trained soldiers ready to jump into the fray should a ground invasion of Gaza take place.
Huge missile arsenal, and they have trained for this. 4 ground invasions, which is difficult. If you ask the Russians about Bakhmut, which is now Artyomovsk, or Mariupol, the Azovstal siege, that takes a warrior. It's difficult stuff. Just look at how Gaza, it will be building to building, horrible stuff. And
and it was
6 or 7 years ago, even withstanding our Western, impression of this, 6 or 7 years ago, Hezbollah already kicked Israel's ass. They did.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, what would they do
did
today?
it when they had 6,000 soldiers instead of 100,000, and they had like 15,000 missiles instead of 250,000 missiles. What about Biden? So if you're Joe Biden, you've got an election coming up. Do you really want Iran to enter this? Is now the time that you want to have a big Middle East war where the shipment of oil stops, where Iran cannot get their oil onto the global market? So I think Biden is not happy about this timing, and I think he's working behind the scenes to try and figure something out, and that's why Blinken's there. But they're trying to figure something out, and again, they don't hold the cards. They're going to have to cut deals with Hezbollah, with Iran, and that's going to give them a sense. I think that's going to cut them down a notch, and they're not going to have this hubris that they probably had a couple of weeks ago, and it'll be great. So let's see what Ben has here.
I'm asking, should I push that play button? Because 60 Minutes is very notorious for copyright strikes, and this whole show might be copyright stricken. So might just describe it or just read it. Because you know who we are? We're the United States of America, for God's sake. We're the most powerful nation in the history of the world. And then he went on to, we can support Israel and Ukraine and our international security policy, what do you call it? Whatever he said. Anyway, is what he likes to say. So I'm not.
That's the brave face. He's putting on for the public, but behind the scenes, He knows that's not true.
Yeah, this was before he announced he's going to Israel for this solidarity visit, which I really enjoyed that Zelensky also offered. And he said, no, it's not the right time. I'm going to stop sharing because I don't want to tempt. Yeah.
This chest beating is more telling than anything else. I mean, it's just...
So are the aircraft carriers. This is not diplomacy. This is not engaging with the different sides and trying to bring peace and settle the conflict. The interesting thing is, I'm never going to say like your chancellor or your prime minister or but Ursula von der Leyen, German chick, was one of the first to arrive there, and we are 100% behind Israel. Any reactions they do. Baerbock, my favorite foreign minister, also German, said we are all Israelis today. And after Ursula said that, there was an outrage. The Politico ran an article saying that the diplomats in the EU are in an uproar against the witch. Ursula, because she overstepped. Borrell, who was in China talking to Wang Yi at the time, had to announce in one of these presses to say Ursula does not speak for the EU. I mean, how bad do you have to screw up to do that? Then there was there's a UN now panel investigation, something like that, saying that bombing Gaza and all the civilians is a war crime. It's collective punishment. There's a whole lot of backtracking to these initial emotion-filled fervor, saying we're with you, whatever it takes, except for India. But
let me make one more point about Biden, if I can. So again, he's got an election coming up, and he is very concerned with the American electorate, and he wants to do everything he can to ease their quality of life going into this election. So he has been forced to go to Venezuela and try and get Venezuela to come to some agreement in order to get Venezuelan oil online to ease the price at the pump for American consumers. So again, if he's willing to do that, how terrified is he of Iran blocking the Straits of Hormuz in a larger war, with Israel? So he does not want that. Like, that is so not in his interest. And we know that because of his going hand in hand to Venezuela, saying, "Please, Mr. Maduro, let's talk about this. Let's bring some of your oil online, and we'll go ahead and end some sanctions." So that's what's going on. And you had a slide about that. I think. Yeah, here we go.
I can show you that one. That was from the Washington Post. Jeff Bezos, CIA Central. And that to me was interesting because it's a half promise. We'll ease sanctions, maybe this one, maybe that one. We'll tell you which, but we need all these international observers, which were there at the previous goddamn election. Everybody recognizes Maduro now. Where is the guy? Juan Guaido. Yeah, he's somewhere in Florida, isn't he?
He's the legitimate leader.
He's playing dominoes in Florida.
He's at university or something, but they're doing this because, the other thing Americans always forget is geography. As you mentioned, the Straits of Hormuz. If that is closed, that's Qatar, that's the Emirates, that's Saudi Arabia.
20% of the global oil, I think, goes through there.
Yeah, even the Saudis, which of course have western coast, which goes up to, the Suez Canal and Europe through Egypt. They have the infrastructure going from west to east. This is their port of call. This is where they export their oil. That's shut down. I mean, forget about $100 barrel of oil. There's no money on earth that you can get you a barrel of oil if that happens. And I think that's where there's a whole lot of. Carlo's got a thought.
I want to circle back around to Gaza. First of all, speaking of Venezuela, Maduro, I'm sure he and his people know not to trust the United States now, given the way they've been screwed.
Absolutely.
So I'm hopeful that they're on top of this deal. But look at Ukraine. Where are U.S. and NATO arms winding up that were given to Ukraine? Even the ones that Israel sent to Ukraine, they're ending up in the hands of Hamas.
That's corruption.
So Hamas is getting some of these weapons from the corrupt people in Ukraine, which the world already knew about. It was famous for being the most corrupt country in Eastern Europe, and that's saying something. Now, of course,
all of Europe.
Do you know how low they are on actual support? They had these bobbleheads, like Ursula and this, but today I'm not going to try his name because I'm not good with Romanian, but the Prime Minister of Romania arrived, and they celebrated the first world leader to stand with Israel is the Romanian Prime Minister. Now they're expecting Biden, but they're really low on support. Well, 140 countries are gathering in Beijing.
Yeah.
Okay? Just the comparison. They are celebrating Romania at this moment.
Let
the
me-
U.S. is now preparing a mega pack for Israel and Ukraine and Taiwan.
Well, I read that, and they put in for these Republicans also Taiwanese and the southern Mexican border has some key things that it needs. It's just everything. Did anybody see the Janet Yellen thing?
Of course, we can afford 2 wars, Ben.
Of course,
We're
why
America.
not 3? Why
10
not
billion.
We can afford 2 wars. It doesn't matter about San Francisco and the homeless population. We can afford 2, 3, 4, whatever it takes for our ruling class to maintain their hegemony and their empire. No price is too high, Ben.
After
10
groveling?
10 billion is the figure for this new package.
That was the
10 billion,
emergency.
that's for 10 billion just for Israel military aid, right?
Yeah,
For emergency, for all three, for Ukraine, for Israel, and for Taiwan.
Oh, so they're working everything into this 10 billion because the Jerusalem Post said that Israel required this emergency military aid. And
Wait. Yeah. Israel is asking for 10 billion,
10
but the
billion.
White House is working on a package.
Oh, yeah. They're
Oh.
trying to work everything into it so as not to be
And-
itemized again. Yeah.
I think I mentioned on one of the episodes that the Biden administration is trying to get a one and done funding for Ukraine because they don't like how the Republicans keep holding it up. So they want to do a one and done, 100 billion to Ukraine, and that'll cover them all the way through the next election. So they're trying to get that
end
passed.
of 2024.
And they might be able to, but I don't know. So I wanted to talk about, we talked about Brian Berletic earlier. Look, Brian is an awesome analyst. And
We love Brian.
He's great at analysis. So Todd just shared with us some cutting information about Brian Berletic's take on Hamas. So he says in today's new atlas, Brian Berletic clarifies his message on Hamas. It's super solid. And then Dr. Montero, he's also a friend of the show. He does great analysis at the Saturday Free School. So
Damn,
so,
I missed both
so
of these.
I don't want to disparage and I don't want to misrepresent the points of view of these tremendous heroes, working class heroes. So check them out for yourself. But yeah, no, I definitely don't want to mislead anybody. And,
no misleading. But I also watched the Scott Ritter interviewed by, I think, Alex from Reportify Media, and the title was "Who's to Blame" or something like that. You can probably find it based on that. And he said, obviously, this was a trap, either by just some independent minds in Hamas, whether they were working with anyone. We won't know anyway. It was obviously a trap to get them into this really bloodthirsty response that they have displayed for the entire world to see. It doesn't matter what, the Euractiv or Euronews or the Washington Post or the New York Times says. Most of the world is fully aware of this barbaric response, and it's turned public opinion like 180, not 360 degrees.
Well, I mean, Putin was referred to the ICC for saving children from a war zone. Meanwhile, Netanyahu is just, indiscriminately killing 1,000 children so far, and nobody in the West cares. Go ahead.
Other than Gustavo Petro, who said we will not be a party to war crimes, and he said fuck off.
Nobody in the West cares. Nobody in the Western world, in the Western orbit,
Except one person I have to shout out, and I'm going to read her title because I'm not sure. I think this is a Spanish person, Minister for Social Rights, Ion Belara. I haven't heard about her before, but she said that what the strikes on Gaza are a war crime, and she wants to put Netanyahu at The Hague in front of the ICC.
Well, that's only
obviously
fair.
Not gonna
that's
happen,
only consistent.
Kudos. Sorry.
And what was her title again? And her post, her position?
She is the Spain's Minister for Social Rights. Again, unknown to me until this point.
Yeah.
She was the
one. Good for her for speaking out. I mean, it's everybody's moral duty, moral obligation to speak out. But and their silence is deafening.
Yeah.
I just made a meme. I just want to. I made a meme with a Bugs Bunny template that says, "I wish all liberals very good luck reconciling the unanimous Western state support for genocide of Muslims in Palestine and the oceans of tears that they cry for Muslims in Xinjiang.
A double standard, to say, an understatement of the century to call that a double standard, but that is absolutely spot on.
And we can see you now in the hello darkness, my old friend.
Did you want me to put the Janet Yellen clip up? I saw you had that earlier, and
That's an interesting thing to watch as well. But I thought if we want to have a little bit of fun and we're talking about memes, maybe share what I have. This is what you find on Indian internet. It's just, I think, insane. I described it last time, but that's the Hindu Adolf Hitler. And the next one was not on Twitter, but some other. And, I don't really understand. They were a colonized nation. The only place in Asia, by the way, Leo, that had pro-Israel protests was Japan, who partook in colonization of the Asian lands, obviously. And Prime Minister Kishida's approval just went down to like 30% or 32% or something like that. So people did not like this stupid minority doing stupid things, even there. So there's something.
Yeah,
but I thought I'd have a laugh about Indian social media. Is something else, man. By the way,
it's so clear.
Since the day this happened, when I saw Israel announcing something, whatever they're talking about, this war crime, that, all of the disapproving replies were in Hebrew, and all of the approving ones were Hindi. It's just the weirdest thing. Some weird observation for 2023. I didn't.
It's just so clear how the lines are drawn, between exactly the former colonial powers, the fascist powers, and the rest of the world, the victims of colonialism, countries who are now stronger. The lines are so clear. I mean, it's very impressive, the mental gymnastics that all the liberals in the West are able to muster at this moment. Like, they are really like doing some inhuman acrobatics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No consistency, no coherency, no logic. It's just narrative, and it doesn't even comport with any basic logical framework.
Let me share with you one thing I enjoyed. This came out in the Financial Times behind a paywall, but I managed to grab an archive version. And since the West, well, at least in Europe, is admitting, okay, the people in Gaza are innocent, we should save them, they're all talking about, well, we should get them out through the Rafah crossing into Egypt, or maybe get them to Jordan. And the King of Jordan said, fuck off, we're not going to do that. And this was with the Al-Sisi, the Egyptian prime minister, who you can bring it on screen if you like, okay. Which I just really love this. In the Financial Times, he said, if you want us to take 1 million people, well, I'm going to send them to Europe. You care about human rights so much. Well, we'll let you take them. And he's exactly right. Of course, none of these people take into account that the Gazan people don't want to leave. That's their home. That's always been their home, because that would be playing into the hands of the Israel regime. They want them gone. That is what's called ethnic cleansing. You're not going to play into their hand. Hello, Polly. I'll stop sharing.
So there's several hot spots we're keeping our eye on. Of course, in Ukraine, Russia seems to be really dominating the battlefield. Ukraine seems to be running out of artillery, running out of trained men, and just losing on all fronts. And then there's Taiwan. Taiwan, we have an election coming up soon. Most likely the KMT will win, and they're definitely all about friendly relations and good relations with China, and not becoming the next Ukraine. In Japan, of course, like you mentioned, the government there is entirely pro-West. They're just a pro-West proxy, and they have no support amongst the people, or they're losing support amongst the people.
Yeah. Unfortunately, while this is going on, aircraft carriers, readiness and all that, they are also sending B-52s, the strategic, these are nuclear bombers, to South Korea. I mean, just what could be more irresponsible at a time like this? Why not do the stupidest thing you can imagine?
I just want to blow up the conversation a little bit. Behind all of this is this deep-seated notion of Western white supremacy, and it's being shattered. And one of the most interesting ways I see of it being shattered is going back to Gaza, is the fact that a bunch of the missiles that have fallen on Tel Aviv and the rest of Israel not only were had origins in Israel through Ukraine and its corruption, but were refurbished from missiles um, formerly fired into Gaza by Israel. So
That
I
too,
think what
and from Afghanistan, left in Afghanistan by the US. That's the other
yeah,
source.
it's I think what's happening here is this notion of Western white supremacy is being shattered, and that's going to be really hard for white people in the
Well,
West to
that's
take.
You're
definitely
funny,
It's
Paulie.
it's it's hard enough on the domestic front for them to believe that African Americans can do anything that a white Americans can do, and they shatter that myth and African Americans shatter that myth every day, but the U.S. still works really hard to maintain it. Um,
it's one of the
so,
fundamental ideologies of Western imperialism is definitely white supremacism.
Can I add to that? Because I watched,
Yes.
you know, this guy, Professor Danny Shaw. He's very active in South America. He speaks perfect Spanish, but the American accent he's got is something I don't know where, but it's so unique. Do you know
Is he
him?
the bald guy?
Bald guy, yeah.
Yes.
In a special way. I want to add that when we talk about white supremacy, I just recently understood this about Carlo and Billy Bob. It's not about being lily white like I am. My basic color is pale blue. I have to be in the sun for a week to be white. Okay, we are talking about the mentality, which is what the Portuguese had when going to South America, which is what Japan had when slaughtering half of China, which is, you know, it really isn't the classical color thing. It is about this colonial, I am better, I'm going to bring civilization, and it doesn't matter if I have to kill half of you to achieve it. You know, that's what we're talking about.
yes,
Yeah, of course.
And
Danny Shaw said this very well.
It never. I mean, in some spheres, the colorism, it plays more of a role. But obviously, if we zoom out historically, I mean, mainland Chinese people were classified as black or had the legal rights as black people in
Lesser
apartheid
than.
South Africa, and Taiwanese Chinese people from Taiwan were classified as white, honorary white under the apartheid South Africa regime. So like it literally makes no sense and has never made any sense. And you're absolutely right, Ben. Skin color has always played a very minimal role. Like in if we go deep into
Yeah,
the
you go
ideology
back to the
of colonialism and capitalism, like I have to mention again that black people could vote in the by the mid 1800s, and all women could vote as well in the 1800s if they owned land in the United States.
that was the category of white. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really more about ownership. It's more about the class. The bourgeoisie had all of the rights. So, but at the same time, you know, in some situations or in some spheres, colorism does play a large role as well.
I mean, historically, Southern politicians in the United States would tell white people when they were running for office, at least you're not black. You have the rights of white people, whereas we're going to keep lynching blacks as much as we want to, as
Yeah.
much as our bloodlust suggests we want to.
That's
So,
what they
but
told the Irish.
there are those. There are
Yeah, I mean,
that,
Irish
that
were the
aspect.
first
That
functionally black, I guess. I mean, the Irish people are pale, ginger, freckled, you know, the absolute utter white. But functionally, they were the first blacks, the first colony of.
Well,
Yeah.
except I'm careful to make a distinction between indentured servants, which the Irish were, and out slaves, which the African
In
the
the United
Right,
States.
rightly so. Yeah, the transatlantic slave
because it was
trade.
much more brutal
Sure,
than
sure.
being an
Yeah.
indentured servant.
Sure.
Yeah.
But let's not forget that under Oliver Cromwell, Ireland's population was halved in 2 years under Oliver
Yes.
Cromwell, and that's the first step of colonialism, which took place right next to England in Ireland. That's the first step. There was an experiment, you know, in many ways, an experiment to see how we can subjugate and how we can absolutely do whatever we want with this population. and also an experiment in economic terms and of building the primitive accumulation of capitalism of the new bourgeois class was built. Their wealth and power was built from that process on. At first, colonizing Ireland,
Right.
and I just have to
It was
mention
land at the time.
Yeah, and that's why the Irish call the Union Jack the butcher's apron.
Yeah,
That's their term for it.
yeah.
And
that's why
after 10 years of Cromwell and his son, even Britain went back to France to bring Edward III back to rule, gave him the divine right of kings to rule Britain. That's how
And
that's
a
how
fun
idiotic
fact,
the
and
Puritan
that's why
Revolution was.
that's also why Irish drinking songs are the best in the world, saying, "Come out, you black and tans, come out and fight me like a man." It's just beautiful.
Yeah.
And a little fun fact: the word Tory was originally an Irish word for hunters, meaning the hunters, the police that hunted the Irish rebels,
Ah,
all the way back then, all the way back in
the
1600s.
Fenians.
Yeah, Tory was originally a word that meant that. And also, just as an aside, how disgusting is this fucking guy Bono? Like, speaking of
Oh,
Irish
Jesus,
people,
worst.
he said some shit about like we are losing our souls if we don't support Israel.
Yeah.
Like, dude,
2
He
weeks
lost his soul a
ago, he
long
was
time
all
ago.
over Ukraine, right? Just
Yeah,
2
of
weeks
course.
ago, he was
Of
the
course.
absolute Ukraine man, next to Mark Hamill. Obviously, these are the two that flipped immediately to Israel.
So I think it's I think what we're all saying here, I mean, what I would say here, I should say that, is that the ethos of the ruling Western Empire is not white supremacy, and it's not Christianity. So if they have a bias, if they have one principle, it's to maintain their share of wealth, power, and privilege. But to do that, they engage in racism and they promote racism.
And
That's not to
division
say
of
that
all
they're not
kinds.
racist. Of course they're racists, but that's not their motivating force, They exploit racism because it benefits their material interests, and it's their material interests that is their number one principle. But yeah, who suffers when they want to divide a society of working class people along the lines of race and religion? Who suffers? It's the minorities that suffer, because they whip up the ignorant working class people into a legitimate feeling of racism, and there's a lot of white racists that are a problem. And that
absolutely.
mentality, that ideology is a problem, but it's being inculcated from people who don't necessarily agree with it. They don't really care. They just want to maintain their power. I don't know. I think that's kind of important to say. I'm not sure if you guys even agree.
No,
I think
we
I do.
absolutely agree.
I think I do,
But
yeah.
I would just add and deepen that a little bit. They didn't merely use racism; they invented the very concept of race,
Fair.
which is very different from that of ethnicity and culture. And racism. We have to make this a very important point. Racism is very different from xenophobia, and very different from ethnocentricity, right? Xenophobia and ethnocentricity has existed for millennia. The feeling of our culture is the best. Come on, everybody thinks their food, their recipes are the best. Like, everybody thinks their men and women are the most beautiful. Like, that's kind of natural. Like, the word for every, for themselves, of every ethnic, of every indigenous group in the world is the people, some version of the people. Like, every indigenous people thought of themselves as kind of the center of the universe.
And that's
But
ethnocentricity.
there's a huge
That's ethnocentricity, and xenophobia is the little bit of fear of people that are different, the people that smell.
Okay, but let me.
So I'm just making a point that racism is different. It's related to these concepts, but it is a much more poisonous and toxic concept based on the pseudoscience of skin color determining your genetic superiority. Like, the ancients, maybe made fun of each other for their spices and the way they smell, but they did not dehumanize them, and they did not
genetically I'm superior and genetically
exactly.
You're inferior.
They did not have this idea that these people are subhuman because they eat curry or like because
Yeah.
they whatever, or because of skin color. Like
That's
in
interesting.
Rome,
No,
there were
that's a great point. But
in
Vin
Rome
really
there
did.
were African kings in Rome.
I want to bring in the opposite because I'm glad that you went on to the word people, because the Chinese people are not one people. If you look at all the distinct groupings, they're all the people, but they're all Chinese. Russia did the same. I mean, a Chechen looks very, very different from somewhere in the eastern Siberian region. There's many, many multiple languages and people. But what they did throughout the years was they unified. S.L. Canton made this point about language and sort of a central unifying government, which they achieved. Europe never achieved. During the medieval ages, we were always at each other's throats. And even right here, or the Balkans, you can toss a stone and there'll be two peoples who hate each other because we allowed this shit to tear each other up, to tear us apart. We really, really did. And I wish that's what the Middle East, to my mind, in the long run, let's say 20, 30 years, I think that's what they're doing. They're healing this thing. They are becoming different peoples of the same sort of civilization. Let's call it that, because Putin made a big point at the Valdai Forum saying the civilizational states are the future. And I think that sort of healing is what's needed all around the world. I mean, China and Russia are just benchmarks in this. There are border towns, in China with the Russian restaurants, lots of Russian people going across, exactly the same the other way around. And obviously there's Russian people with the Asiatic eyes. There's very, very Mongolid Russians. There's very Uralic Chinese as well. And they won't let the West exclusively use this against them, use this to separate them, to divide them. That's
and the West that is their one of the major strategies is to focus on this idea of ethnic identity, and you are this and they are that, and you should have your own, like that's their whole strategy of decolonizing Russia, which is very trendy now in Europe. All of these art institutions.
Oh Jesus! Using that language.
Institutions are doing these massive, or like the things like exhibitions and forums and conferences about decolonization, and let's start with Russia and China first because these are colonial empires and we must decolonize Russia and China. It's absolutely disgusting.
And I'd like to point out once again, Zionism, just like Nazism, was predicated. It was predicated fundamentally on this pseudo-scientific idea of intractable genetic differences that makes it impossible for these two groups to assimilate. Yeah. So the Aryans did not want to assimilate with anyone else because they were the Übermenschen, the super people. Whereas the Jews were the underpeople, the underclass, like the Slavs, etc. So
yeah, I mean, they did this with
different.
Before they're handing it over. They did this with Hong Kong. You saw the big riots with the umbrellas and the black revolts. We are the superior. Whenever you hear "we are the superior people" to those, that's where the West has its roots.
No, that's interesting. And I wasn't that familiar with their rhetoric, but I mean, again, it makes sense because, like Leo said, that is their strategy, that is their tactic. And that's what Zionism is too. So Zionism is saying Jews cannot assimilate because they are genetically different than other people, and that's why the other people always oppress them. And so we need our own, our own homeland, our own state. And so, unfortunately, they tried to make their own state in a place that was 95% non-Jewish. So again, you needed, terrorism, ethnic cleansing, and land theft to make Zionism a reality. And to maintain that reality, you also need to continue the terrorism, ethnic cleansing, and land theft. But Zionism was declared by the UN as a racist ideology for several years, for a very long time. It was understood. It was no different than apartheid South Africa. It's based on racism, and racism is not scientific, and racism is reprehensible. But that's what Zionism is. Sorry, YouTube, it's the fucking truth.
And when we're having these conversations, last week at our every Tuesday small communist bar meeting, it was a huge kind of argument between different factions. Like, people argue on different levels of this topic, right? There are different levels that we can engage with ethnicity and self-determination, right? Ultimately, I mean, of course, we want ethnic rejuvenation of indigenous cultures and such. But in our historical era, the only way to do that is when, for example, the Soviet Union gave the autonomous Union member states statehood. When the Soviet Union gave the Buryats, the Georgians, the Ukrainians statehood and gave them self-determination, but under a bigger structure,
union
a
over
bigger state, right?
Yeah.
That is the only way in our era of neocolonialism, which is just as brutal as colonialism was, because if these places don't have sort of the protection of a larger state entity, they will become victimized and used against socialist powers. So like there was one woman who's an academic and she's works in these fields. She was just arguing for ethnic self-determination as against large nation states that in her view sort of consumes them, envelops them.
Yeah.
That's when you have to bring in economics, in my opinion. But you
Well,
can go on if you want to.
Well, you got to bring in economics, and you got to bring in the perspective of class struggle, because
And
that's the
technology.
most important thing.
Oh, yeah.
That's what these people ignore. Because in what context? Like, is this ethnic state going to be a tool? Are they going to be protected by the Western imperialism and used as a tool to defeat socialism? Or are they going to be part of the socialist bloc that opposes imperialism? And to say that, to just ignore that question and pretend like that's not a reality that ought to inform our opinions of these things is liberalism. But yeah. No, we run into people like that. So you mentioned it was a communist discussion, but that lady doesn't sound like a communist. It doesn't sound like she's viewing things from
She sounds EU.
The reality of class struggle.
I mean, she is
manifests itself as the struggle.
I mean, this is the difficult thing. I think she was having the same conversation, but on a different level. You know what I mean? Like on a almost philosophical level, and we are talking about geopolitics and actual reality.
Well,
the class nature of the state is important. The class.
Let me give you my experience.
All important. Absolutely.
A quarter of a century ago, 20, 30 years, the EU had this promise. That was the promise with which we were boarded, the post, Warsaw Pact countries. We were coming here, so okay, we'll continue prospering. We'll have our protections that we had under socialism, but we'll be part of this bigger family, and we'll all have our rights protected and all that. In reality, what it was absolute stagnation, Eastern Central Europe, not to mention Yugoslavia later, the post-Yugoslav spaces. And the youth, they have to migrate to the prosperous West and basically, wash the fucking dishes in London or Brussels, while the at home, it just went into poverty and shit. There's a lot of those people actually coming home right now, which is a very welcome change.
They weren't just excluded; they were a vampire.
Second, third class citizens.
Vampirism of EU imperialism.
Oh, absolutely. All the funds, if you actually look at the direction, the big arrows of capital, they went into Germany. Sorry, that is the beating heart. It's the Deutschmark 2.0 is the euro.
Don't
and that's
apologize.
What it was meant to do. And people still don't understand that. When they speak of the EU, I saw this map years ago from an intern, some EU official's intern, who broke down the EU, not even to countries, but to the level of like little counties. Like Hungary was made out of 12 of these. Germany was made out of 50 of these. And maybe at that time, if I was 12, I would say, yay, everybody's free. Even more freedom to just siphon off the wealth, the lifeblood, and no one will stay there. Just become a fucking barren wasteland. That's what EU loving people in Hungary just never understood.
I want to make a point about the EU. It was kind of predicated on this idea of we're going to turn the EU into the United States, because in the United States, what you have is a race to the bottom where each state outcompetes the other states in lowering the costs of labor and lowering the costs of doing business. So it's a race to the bottom if you're a worker. And so that's what they were trying to create That's the model they were trying to create in the EU. So all these little countries would just be states, and they would try and out compete other countries to entice big corporations. So hey, come here. We don't have any environmental regulations. Our workers will get paid just $3 an hour. So come with us, and that's what they want. That's how they have it in the U.S. and that's how they wanted it in the EU. But there was also other geopolitical considerations too. But those were the economic considerations.
There's some obvious things about that can be garnered from the U.S. experience. First of all, I want to add that the states that get the most federal aid are the reddest states. So they're the people.
Oh yeah, that's the U.S. Very strange, eh?
They get the most aid.
The fiscal conservative, the responsible people, they get the most.
But I want to talk about the robber barons for a minute from the middle to late 19th century. They all had their own railroads. Gould had his railroad, Rockefeller his, and so on. They all had different gauges, so that to ride one railroad, you could go 35 miles. Then you had to get off the train and get on another robber baron's railroad. There was a different gauge. But science conquered that. Yeah. It was partially government, but it was realized that uniformity would make the economy hum much better. But not only that, there were gauges that were more technologically, enduring or could haul heavier loads, and technology won out. So that the standardization was a result of what we kind of more or less wrongly call universal physical laws. And universal physical laws are having, through the Chinese, God bless them, are having a huge renaissance.
Oh yeah,
that's what the Chinese are all about. They understand science and mathematics to its core, and that's the only thing that operates for them. And as a consequence, economically, things prosper and thrive. I just wanted to point that out.
Todd is spitting some really, really good ones today, by the way. Kudos. But I want to say that's nice. I like that thought. But I think the way SL Cantham made this point, and I've seen some videos from Xi Jinping that basically the Belt and Road Forum, they made this point, Xi Jinping did multiple times, that we see peoples as organisms. The West sees them as atoms, individuals, little individuals to control, confront, whatever they want to do with it. But we see them as organisms. And the motto of harmony isn't just a simple, oh, this is a Chinese motto. This is actually, real substantive economic industrial thinking is what they want to do. So when they talk about this world order in which no one can tell another country what to do, how to do it, they mean themselves as well. They mean Russia as well. They actually strive towards what the UN was supposed to be, was meant to be,
and this brings up a very big question that a lot of non-Marxist understanding people are raising and are asking, right? In the post-hegemonic world, in the multipolar world, how can we make sure that, or how do we know, what guarantee do we have that a new oppressive hegemon will not emerge?
They're self-guaranteeing it, basically, self-limiting.
And my response is that if you understand that the only blocks to the road to socialism, which is internationalism, socialism and internationalism, has been imperialism. That if we understand that the removal of democratically elected socialist leaders all over the world, on every continent, is the only process with which the West or the colonial powers has been able to stop, sometimes successful, sometimes not, in the 20th century, the movement towards socialism. And so I would say absolutely that once US, UK, Western hegemony ends, all of the nations will sooner or later gravitate towards socialism. This is a historical reality that we must understand completely, because imperialism and capitalism are not just two sides of the same coin. They are exactly the same thing. One is on an international level and one is on a national level, right?
It's the final stage of
one cannot exist without the other. Without the genocide of the Irish and the Indians and the Africans and the Chinese, colonialism and capitalism empires could not have become so powerful. And without this, a new hegemonic, oppressive hegemon cannot replace the old one.
Yeah.
And also, as someone very, very acutely, very accurately said, we will emerge from this era changed, because imperialism and capitalism was created under specific historical conditions, under objective historical conditions, and the conditions are different now, and so the conditions for a total domination of the politics and economy of other nations will cease to exist. And corporations, sure, capitalism will still survive after the end of Western hegemony, sure. But these corporations, they monopolize certain parts of the market, sure. But their ability to launch coups, their ability to remove and install leaders in other countries.
Where does that come from? That comes from soft power, the information sphere, and that is what's most been weakened. But sorry, Leo, you were on a. I'm sorry.
Yeah, their ability to intimidate via armies, their ability to impose sanctions on non-obedient countries, would not exist. Like international corporations, there might be some unfair trade that still goes on, but imperialism will end.
And this comes back to the nature of the state. If you have a corporation in a state that's run by a party of the workers, they're not going to be able to lobby the state to sanction or to build an army to attack some other country to, kill their working class to benefit a corporation. That's just not going to happen. But absolutely. My response to that question would be, imagine yourself being a liberal and saying, well, I don't want to defeat imperialism because you can't guarantee me that something bad might happen in the future. Well, guess what, motherfucker? Something bad might happen in the future. That's fucking life. There's no fucking guarantees, but we still need to fucking improve this place. And it's a vast improvement getting rid of Western imperialism. So don't make the perfect the enemy of improvement, you stupid fuck. Sorry, I was having a lot of conversation.
I'm going to show you something which I think both of these relate. So I'll start sharing some what do you call it? Share my screen with audio, because I've got 2 clips. So I'm going to go entire screen. This one, share system audio. This is a famous Serbian song, Far Away. And it's a Serbian song. It's enjoyed by President Vučić at the gala, at the dinner, at the Belt and Road Forum. Okay.
So that's in China. It's a Serbian dance.
Far Away is an ancient folk song. It's beautiful. It means the world to Serbian people. And this is the Russian people. Well, that's actually just Vladimir Putin coming in to meet Xi Jinping. And then the family photo comes near the end.
Xi Jinping has the best hair.
Yeah, man. And I'm going to pause it there. Pause it around here. Because as you see in the center up here, that's Vučić. And around here, that is Orban Viktor, the 2 European leaders who made it to this forum. The rest of Europe is just not here. They're not in any capacity. Now, recently, Russia has banned the Central European University, SEU, which is a Soros-funded big NGO, which we banned about 5 years ago, and all the EU liberal idiots were outraged. Freedom of speech, freedom of speech. Well, now you can have actual Hungarians actually talk about Hungarian stuff, and that is the only reason we could actually vote for this guy and make it to this forum and have opportunities with Vladimir Putin, like atomic energy, like infrastructure project with China, all of that, because we have to regain the information space. Canton always says this, that soft power, that is what the US is terrified of. If it loses that, you know, if on Chinese social media there was this big alarming article somewhere, foreign interest or something, that most of Chinese media is pro-Palestine and against Israel, and you know, yeah, they're not. It's not webbed with Google, Facebook, all of that stuff. They have their own. It's a very big lesson, I think, to the world that needs to be, I think, tidied up in order for you to actually make decisions in your own interest. And on your point that this is inevitably socialism, if the viewer is not socialist, I'll call on Michael Parenti. Don't call it socialism. Call it camels or window shades. I don't care. If the train is unified and the train connects to another country and we make stuff and they make stuff and therefore this village is growing, the children get fed and the next generation lives better,
Absolutely.
I'm for that. Okay.
Absolutely. That's not what I meant to say earlier. Is that
No, I'm just saying to people who are not.
I'm just saying that this will pave the road. This will remove the blocks on the road to socialism, which
Absolutely.
is the natural flow of human development and history. Especially if we understand, which we do, hopefully, that all of the socialist countries in the 20th century did not fail; they were defeated.
Yes.
Right. All of them. They were defeated by a much more powerful, materially, technologically powerful colonial empires, which became powerful through the process of slavery and genocide and colonization. So without that, you know,
the Soviet Union, we can definitely say, was defeated. I mean, Cuba struggles on, North Korea struggles on. They're definitely
Yugoslavia
temporarily
was destroyed.
impaired because of the sanctions. Temporarily impaired. You know, Cuba's not defeated. North Korea is not defeated.
No. I mean, the ones that were defeated.
The Soviet Union definitely did dismantle itself in a coup, and we have people to blame for that. Definitely, the West bears responsibility, and the fact that the quality of life isn't better in Cuba, in North Korea, in Venezuela, is a direct result of, you know, imperialism.
Yes.
So
and there's no one size fits all. And basically 1930s Soviet Union, the mass industrialization, the amazing projects they did, you know, the largest dam in the world, the electrification on that is not what we need in 2023. It worked for that phase very well.
Our material conditions are different. Exactly.
The post-Khrushchev system, I love the Soviet Union, and I was basically a brother country to them until the 1990s. It didn't work. It got rigid. It couldn't change. The Chinese could. And that's where we are. I mean, it was exactly 15 years ago, 2008. It was Xi Jinping's first premiership when he announced the Belt and the Road. Separately, but basically became the Belt and Road Initiative. It's done more good to the world than the US ever did. And that is the trajectory of history.
It's a very low bar, Ben. That's a very low bar.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
I was summarizing all the hotspots around the world, and I was actually going somewhere with that.
Sorry.
Everybody rudely interrupted me. That's okay. I was just trying to point out that, you know, all these hotspots are going on, and it's culminating in a election in the imperial core. Like in the United States, there's an election coming. Just to deal with all that chaos, now throw in an election in the United States. And I wanted to talk about, 60 Minutes, and I wanted to talk about Biden's interview in 60 Minutes, and I wanted to kind of read Trump's analysis of that.
You can show that. Yeah.
I can't show it. I wish I could, but
You're right. We can't.
I'll just read it. It's a little bit long, but Trump is pithy, so it'll be entertaining. So the show 60 Minutes should be ashamed of themselves. They just interviewed crooked Joe Biden and led him along like a lost child. Each question contained the answer and was so weak and apologetically asked that it was a joke, which should be considered a campaign contribution to the Democratic Party. Why would CBS get free public airwaves for this highly partisan show, which never apologized to me for the mistakes they made on the laptop from hell? They are protecting Biden, even though he is the most corrupt and incompetent president in the history of the United States. The Carter administration looks absolutely brilliant by comparison. The only thing the Biden regime does well is go after Crooked Joe's political opponent, me, but even that will fail. The Middle East, Ukraine, inflation, bad economy, the open border, horrendous Afghanistan embarrassment, gas prices, our great auto worker death march, and so much more make Crooked Joe a total disaster for our once great USA. Make America great again. So a little bit of political stuff in there, but some really spot on, accusations and criticisms of 60 Minutes as we expect them to behave. I mean, would we expect anything else from 60 Minutes? Carlo, you're about to vomit. Tell me why.
No, no.
Carlo, do you think someone a little bit smarter than Trump wrote that? I had that feeling, but maybe someone checked it, you know?
I don't know. I mean, I don't, I don't know how to respond to that really. I don't really ultimately, I don't take Trump very seriously, and I certainly don't take him at his word. He's a career liar. I mean, he's in a class like Clapper and Brennan, the two NSA, the two high level government liars. I mean, he's in that upper echelon of liars. So I don't really take anything he says very seriously. I mean, I don't really know what to say.
Yeah, no,
I don't
no
really
problem.
follow
I didn't mean
him.
to put you on the spot. No problem.
I think he'll win the nomination for the Republican Party. He's very, very likely to win the general election. I can't say much beyond that.
No, that's interesting analysis. I'm not sure they're going to allow him on the ballot. I'm not sure he will win the Republican nomination. I don't think he will. I don't think they're going to let him in the general election. I think he's too much of a liability at this very, very, very volatile and precarious time, and they will not allow him. They will, assassinate him before they let him take the presidency. That's my analysis. But I've been wrong many, many, many times. So take that with a grain of salt.
Question. I thought that it was part of this, but maybe it was a separate interview when he said, I've met these military leaders, American military leaders, and they're among the most stupid in the world. And he got a lot of flack for that. But, I follow, maybe it's a bit
They're
of
dopey babies. They're losers. That's
something like that. But, I follow, and it's a bit of self-harm on my part, General Petraeus and Ben Hodges. And for the last year and a half, they have been the stupidest people in the world. I mean, they've been announcing what Ukraine's going to do and where, and then they did it, and then they lost. It's just, he's objectively right on that particular point.
Yeah, I had another comment about Trump, but it just went out of my head.
Sorry.
That's what I wanted to say. Look, I would agree with you, Billy Bob, except Trump has some very, very powerful sources behind him, and
he
resources.
Does. That's true.
And he's motivated, or that's not really the term I'm looking for, but he's got a following that's really rabid, and that following has made inroads into the Congress enough that they can make Congress a living hell for not only the powers that be, but also for the general population of American people. You can see what's happening with the controversy around getting a speaker for the for Congress.
That was Lindsey Graham.
The people that were running, like Scalise, who's identified himself. He's backed out now, but he has identified himself as a David Duke without the baggage. And David Duke, of course, was a big KKK leader, so obviously he feels very free about expressing his overt racism toward African Americans. So there are those kind of forces behind Trump, and not to mention the huge, the actual very impressive number of billionaires who not only support the Republican Party and Trump and the Democrats into a large measure, playing all angles so that they control people. Like Nikki Haley she's so awash in AIPAC money and military industrial complex money that she's basically a slave to them, and it's one reason she's kind of progressed in the polls, because they also own the corporations that can give her the airtime to become a prominent person. But I think Trump has very powerful people behind him, and I
Yeah.
think if they go after Trump too much, and if they revert to an assassination, it won't be like JFK. The aftermath won't be like JFK. It'll be
Civil
kind of
War.
brutal. I think there will be a kind of lot of independent um, attacks on people, various people. So
I would be shocked if you're right. I would kind of be happy, and here's why. I think Trump is going to be interested in cutting a deal. Trump doesn't want a global war. Trump doesn't want a nuclear war. He wants to cut a deal. So he'll cut a deal with Russia. He'll cut a deal with China. He'll cut a deal with Iran.
Well, he has to get into office
Maybe.
first, right?
Right. Well, and I don't think he will. I don't think he
Yeah.
will.
I mean, that was the point.
But if he does, I think he's our best chance to, have a deal cut and not have a conventional war, a bigger war. But it's some serious speculation. It's all speculation, and but we won't have to wait too long before we find out, what actually happens.
what I would like to know is we're into these we're deeply into this. I mean, time wise, into this Ukrainian conflict, and now we've got this new conflict in Gaza.
Oh, Ukraine's
and
done,
Israel.
son.
Why don't we have an inkling of what the solutions would be that Trump would be proposing? Why hasn't he laid out some of his cards on the table? It reminds me so much of the way Nixon won the election in '68. He and Kissinger claimed they had a secret method for ending the war in Vietnam, and then the war didn't end for the U.S. until 1973, which was 5 more years. So obviously they didn't have anything. They didn't have anything on in mind at all. It was basically a lie.
Trump obviously wouldn't want anything publicized because he doesn't want to be criticized, right? But I think he's willing to make concessions, and of course he can't say those concessions out loud. And he would, even during the negotiations. So let's suppose Trump became the president. He's in a room with Xi Jinping. He's going to make fucking concessions, and he's not going to want to talk about them because guess what? The liberals and the Democrats are going to attack him for making those concessions. That's just how Trump is. He's not going to talk about it.
Yeah.
But he'll go in the room and he'll fucking sign the shit.
Well.
Yeah, he's not a public thinker, but he is a deal maker. But I wanted to make the point that he doesn't have to solve Ukraine. Ukraine's solved, son. It's done. That's just there is no solution.
That's true.
Did you hear that Estonia news? There was this Baltic connector pipeline, a tiny pipeline between Finland and Estonia, and the latest was on Estonian news was there was a Chinese vessel in the vicinity when it broke. I can't wait for Estonia to blame China for their pipeline. That's how desperate they are. That's how they know that this Eastern theater is done, son. It's over.
Is this a different pipeline, or is this the actual? Are we talking about Nord Stream?
No. This is Baltic connector. This is a little free BCM thing that.
They want to blame China for that one.
Yeah, apparently the most plausible one was some sort of anchor got hooked into it and it damaged it. But that's it. It wasn't an explosion. It wasn't anything like Nord Stream, which they are still silent about. But if Estonia wants to blame China now, they know this whole Eastern thing that we're going to be the new best buddies of the US and we're going to kill Russia. That's just done. It's over.
Yeah. Is that noise bothering you guys?
Oh, thanks for coming, Leo.
Yes, thanks, Leo. Thanks.
Great fun as always. See you soon.
Yeah,
I will be listening still.
All right.
All right. Thank you very much, Leo. And I think they're going to cut a deal because I don't think war is in the interest. I think whoever's going to be the next president will cut a deal because they don't have any cards. There's no military option. And so I see peace and prosperity as our future. I think that Trump gives a little more chance of that compared to Nikki Haley, Graham, the establishment warhawks.
Bomb them all, Nikki.
But since they don't have any actual legitimate military options, I don't expect them to push it. They're going to talk tough. But no, I'm not a fan of Trump, and I shouldn't even start talking about how Trump is better than other people because they're
why
all
did you
criminals.
bring him
they're all
up?
crooks and criminals, like Carlos says, and I just know how that can be misrepresented. And people, anything nice you say about Trump, even if you think it's true, is going to be misrepresented as you support Trump.
No, I wanted to say I appreciate you bringing up that quote. I mean, it's just since I don't have any commentary, it doesn't mean anything really. It's just I I I don't know. I just don't I don't believe the guy. I don't follow him very closely.
Yeah, same. I wanted to
Yeah,
say I'm like Elon Musk. When he makes a good decision on behalf of non-censorship, I'm with him. But then he signs like a deal with the MIC, like, with the Pentagon, and then he does something shitty. And Trump to me is the same. But I'm looking at the world as it's increasingly irrelevant to me. Sorry, I know I'm in Europe. It's not irrelevant to you guys. Who's going to be elected in 2024? Because there's going to be real. I think maybe it's too early, but a really shit situation in the US to actually, disregarding what happens in West Asia, in the Middle East, whether it turns into a big energy war or not. The strategic petroleum reserves are at 30-year low. I mean, gas prices are going to skyrocket. That means more inflation. That means economically, things are not looking good in the US. I mean, Yellen and everybody groveled to the Chinese, please save us, and China's not going to save them. They've been selling US treasuries and buying gold. I mean, despite all this and everything
They
in the
saved him
sanctions.
in 2008, and what was the thanks they got for that?
Yeah, Bloomberg is one of the places where I read this headline that despite the sanctions and war and everything, China and Russia are putting the dollar in trouble. That was their phrasing. They're putting the dollar
China's doing that.
Yeah, the dollar in trouble and the yuan and the ruble in a good place or something like that. I mean, sometimes they're being honest. I mean, I also watched another, but that's just usual. Another train crash somewhere or slide off the rails in the US. You guys probably see more of those than I do, but things are not looking good. Whoever inherits this is inheriting a basket of shit, and it's going to take
who would want that
radical,
job?
a
Who would want to
radical.
preside over Imperial Decline? That's a tough.
It's going to
job
take
to
radical changes for people to actually live.
it seems inevitable too.
Yeah.
And I was watching one show. I can't remember who the guest was, but he's a trader. He's a Wall Street trader, and he was talking about another 2008 economic collapse, but even greater. And there's rumblings of that around.
There are.
Whether or not the U.S. economy can survive that,
China really did help, and China was given thanks by the Fed. It wasn't Yellen, whoever it was in 2008, thanked China publicly for their support in shoring up the U.S. economy, the global economy, really. And then the regime change rhetoric continued apace. China's evil. They're a dictatorship. They're committing a genocide in Xinjiang. We got to just regime change them. And so that was their thanks. And so yeah, I'm not surprised that when Yellen asked for help again, they're a little bit less willing to help out.
And remember, whatever happens, the Saudis, Egypt, I'm not going to list them all, but also the Emirates, they're a part of BRICS 11 from January the 1st, from the end of this year. They're already part of it.
That means four new countries.
There's 6 BRICS plus 6. I think there's also an African country and a Latin American country, but I didn't prepare the list today.
So 6 total new members as of.
All right, let's try this. There's Saudi Arabia, there's the Emirates, there's Egypt, there's not Tunisia, Ethiopia in Africa, and that was a real surprise to everyone. Argentina in South America, right. which is interesting because we have elections there, but it's going to be interesting. Poland, by the way, had some new elections. Anyway, I don't want to distract. That's people in the stupid Germany say oil doesn't matter, just stop oil. You've seen these. Well, we'll see how much it matters when it's all within the OPEC plus the BRICS control. That includes all the prices. That is why the Venezuela deal is trying to be struck, because Jesus, we need some anywhere. We don't care if it's a commie dictator. Right. This is their terms.
And can you imagine if there's a war with Iran and Israel? The oil stops from the Middle East.
Try not to.
So they don't want that. There's no military option. These carrier strike groups are irrelevant. But any final thoughts, guys? It's
we've
1 hour and 30 minutes in. We've been here a while.
I don't know where I want to leave it. I'm going to continue looking at the Belt and Road Forum because it gives me a whole lot of hope. And the situation in West Asia, also known as the Middle East, it gives me sleepless nights. I really hope that it gets resolved without someone going poof.
I'm just so weary of the world situation. I'm having a tendency to sort of back off.
Yeah.
Now that, as Ben so accurately pointed out, the Ukraine situation is, for all intent and purposes, resolved. The it's up to Russia and the moves they want to make now and where they want to end it. I just read an article where there's fear that Russia is going to take over not only
Mol-
Transnistria but the Moldova.
Moldo- yeah. Maya Sandu had said that publicly.
Yeah, so what? Okay, fine. If they
The
feel
world's
they
gonna
need it,
mourn Moldova.
take Odessa, make Ukraine a landlocked, insignificant place. Uh, I'm beyond all of that. And the Ukrainians have acted so badly.
Yeah.
The leadership, Zelensky and those people, have just been. I'm just disgusted at that kind of pomp and circumstance that they bring to their their physical presence. I'm weary of that. The things going on in Israel and Gaza are just so disheartening to me
Yeah.
because I've
They
been
dishearten
spending.
and terrify me
It's
sometimes.
been going on for 75 years, and I'm 75 years old. It's been going on for my entire lifetime, and I feel like Norman Finkelstein. I I've had it, you know, and but and let the way it's going to play out is play out. The one thing that gives me hope is that there is a kind of tangible, well, kind of. There's a very for multipolarity that's taking hold vis-a-vis the Belt and Road Initiative and other Chinese developmental um, uh, uh, um, projects. And I watch. We do get a Chinese channel, to Chinese news, and it's never about war.
No.
It's always about development. The French are interested in Chinese wine. No, the Chinese are interested in French wines. Fine, that's great. There's a new a new high speed rail system that's just going into one African country or another. That's wonderful. And people, you see people riding it, and it's uplifting. And so
Yeah.
that's where my hope lies. It certainly doesn't lie with the hegemonic ninnies of the West. That's my final thought.
That was
The
a
head.
great way to wrap. Go ahead, Ben.
The title should have been the hegemonic ninnies of the West. I love that. I love
We
that.
can use that. We can use that. Hopefully, nobody watches till the end. They'll be surprised when we use it next Friday. So, thank you everyone for joining. Thanks, Carlo, for that send off. That was great. We'll be back on Friday, episode 26. Thank you very much for watching.